welcome everyone tonight to the Aeolian Talks London North Centre All Candidates Debate. I am, in fact, Jess Brady, morning anchor and editor with 980 CFPL here in London, and I'm very excited to be here tonight for night 2 of our All Candidates Debates. We started really well last night, and I know that we will build upon that momentum and have a great night tonight. So, without further ado, let's get rolling. We're going to introduce our media panel. First of all, the people who will be putting our candidates through their paces with some tough questions. We have Sarah May Chitty. She is a freelance Anishinaabe journalist and educator. Craig Needles, host of the aptly named Craig Needles Show on 980 CFPL Global News Radio. And Jennifer Beeman, reporter extraordinaire from the London Free Press. So thank you so much to all of you for being here tonight with us. So this evening will be broken down into 7 topics. So we'll have different chunks. We'll go through them. We have a different number of questions per section. Some of them are the same. Each of our panelists will give a question. Others have been broken up for timing purposes. But I'll make sure to let you know how many questions to expect per section before we jump into it. Also, wanted to let you know that our candidates have a minute to respond to each of the questions from our panelists. If at any point a candidate feels that a comment from another candidate has kind of called them out and they would like to have a chance for a rebuttal, they have 30 seconds to do so. So I'll be keeping an eye out for anyone who kind of says, hey, I would like to respond to that, if it's been, obviously directed to their party or to their campaign specifically. And we'll do that rebuttal right after the comment, if at all possible, to keep the flow continuous. So rebuttals are about 30 seconds. That's roughly it. Andrew down in the front is our timekeeper. He has signs for our candidates to show at 30 seconds and 15 seconds. You will also, more than likely, hear the angelic tinkle of, and that's the time's up bell. So our candidates, we will ask them to try and naturally finish their thought that they're in the middle of when that bell sounds. We will all have nightmares of the bell this evening afterwards. So we were going to start off our whole debate here with opening statements from our candidates. Each will come up to the podium and they'll have a minute to introduce themselves and their campaign, essentially. We have pre-drawn the order of our speakers this evening, and we will start with Clara Sorrenti from the Communist Party.
Hello, everyone. Big crowd tonight. My name's Clara Sorrenti, and I'm the candidate for the Communist Party of Canada in London North Centre. On September 27th, I attended the climate strike, and I saw hundreds, if not thousands, of young people chanting, "System change, not climate change." Well, I'm here to tell you that the aim of the Communist Party is to establish system change. We want to establish a socialist society in Canada, and I'm here today to represent that party and to present an alternate view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Carol Dick with the Greens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Dick, your Green Party candidate for London North Centre. The Green Party believes it's time to renew the social contract between Canadians and their government. As a wealthy nation, Canada can and should provide fair and just social services that allow each person to live a dignified and secure life. That is why our platform includes provisions for universal pharmacare, free dental for low-income individuals, a guaranteed livable income to help citizens in hard times and through transitions, and free post-secondary education. However, at the core of this social contract is a duty for the government to provide Canadians with a healthy, livable environment, not through Band-Aid fixes and half measures, but with true long-term strategic planning that sees all levels of government and all political parties working together. We can build an economy that respects the environment, we can build a society that leaves no one behind, and we can build a better future for our grandchildren and our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Peter Fragiscatos from the Liberals.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Aeolian. Thank you to all of you for caring about our democracy and the future course that this country takes. You've given me, over the past 4 years, the great honor of serving as your member of parliament, which I did until the writ was dropped a few weeks ago. And I'm back here as your Liberal candidate once again, as I was in 2015. Elections are about choices. Let's make no mistake about that. It's not only about casting your ballot. When one casts their ballot, they're essentially saying how they feel about a country and its future. They're identifying with a party and its values. I'm a Liberal because I identify with the Liberal Party's values. But I also am a member of this community. I live here. I was born here. This is where my wife and I want to raise our future family, not just in London, but in London North Centre. I look forward very much to the honor of working with the fellow candidates tonight to articulate our vision. I want to keep delivering for London, its people. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
Good evening. My name is Celine Mansoor, and I'm the People's Party candidate in London North Centre. I've been a faculty member at the Western University for well over 3 decades, and I have made my home with my family in London North Centre. I invite the audience, both here and those watching at home, to visit my website, celinemansoor.ca, if they wish to learn more about me. Canada is one of the oldest democracies in the world. We are also one of the most decent societies in the world. Yet today, with the government of Justin Trudeau in Ottawa, Canadians across a vast land feel they have been betrayed in the manner in which the Prime Minister and his party have conducted themselves. The list is long, beginning with the broken promises made in 2015 of balancing the budget, which under this government has risen several fold. The question the people of London North Centre is faced with in this federal election is the same as they faced in the provincial election of 2018. Does this Liberal government deserve to be returned to office, and does the Liberal incumbent deserve to represent them in Ottawa any longer, given the abysmal record of both? I hope by this evening the people of London North Centre will resolve this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Sarah Bohari from the Conservative Party.
Hello, everyone. In the name of God, the most powerful and merciful, I'd like to start my speech or my introduction by, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. I came to Canada for gender equality, democracy and liberty, last but not least a family and affordable lifestyle. I'm fortunate to achieve all of them except for affordability. Me and my volunteers, my campaign volunteers met with thousands of people in London North Centre, and it is painful to hear stories that at the end of the month, it is hard for them to save money. They're working day in and day out. Justin Trudeau promised that he will not raise taxes. He raised taxes on 80% of the middle-class families. I'm Sarah Bohari, running to be your next member of the parliament to fight for you, to serve for you. Vote for me on October the 21st. Thank you.
I believe that was a bit of Robert Frost, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's a first. We've had some poetry in our introductory statements. Next, I would like to welcome Dirka Prout from the NDP up to speak.
Thank you to the organizers for putting this together. I've been door knocking for the past few weeks, and people have expressed to me that they're looking for real change. As a professional engineer, I'm a problem solver, and I'm ready to solve the problem of inequality in London. In this city, we see rising rents, unaffordable housing, and medicines that are getting too expensive. Nationally, the issue of climate change has been ignored by previous governments, who seem to work more for corporations and the ultra-wealthy. The NDP is different. We want to leave no one behind. We want to be on your side, tackling inequality with pharmacare, with prescriptions for all, good green jobs by making big polluters pay, and building affordable homes that are also energy efficient. With different choices, we can get better results. So I'm ready to fight for the people of London North Centre in Ottawa.
Okay, thank you very much for all of your opening statements, candidates. All right, are we ready? It's time to get into the meat of the matter. We will start with our first topic, which is the environment and climate change. We have 3 questions in this section. That means each of our panelists will have a chance to ask a question of the candidates. We will go in order and just rotate through, okay? So our first candidate to answer a question will be Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party, and Sarah May Chitty will begin.
Hi there. So for context, recently a study was published by UBC that concluded that the percentage of biodiversity of land managed by Indigenous people exceeds that of even parks managed by the government, federal government. Regardless of the fact, this is an Indigenous land and that's codified in treaties, but TRC calls to action remind us that Indigenous nations should be a part of decisions. So my question is, how will you with Indigenous communities to protect all land and facilitate Indigenous stewardship beyond reservations?
Well, that's a really, okay, microphone's working. That's a really interesting question. I think the first thing that needs to be addressed in it is that all previous governments has very much failed on addressing this. We need to work together with Indigenous communities and treat them as equals in an equal partnership between nations. We have to respect the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and make sure that they have the right to veto all development on their land, including tar sand projects.
Okay. There it is. Yep. Okay. The Green Party has it directly in our platform that the Indigenous populations, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis should have every opportunity to conserve the land themselves, and that we should be funding different conservation projects that they can address completely on their own. We know that they've been stewards of the land for a very long time. They understand the area better than people coming from a distance, and for that reason, they should have every opportunity to do it. It is part of our reconciliation process. It is part of honoring UNDRIP, and we must make sure that we do everything we can to conserve our biodiversity. We are not doing enough. We're losing a lot of species, and that means creating a partnership with our Indigenous populations.
Thank you very much. And again, that was Carol Dick from the Greens. Next, we have Peter Fragiscatos from the Liberals.
Thank you for the question. We would continue to engage Indigenous leadership right across this country. And I think it's important to think about where we have come. Under the previous government, that engagement did not exist. There was a failure of leadership under Mr. Harper, and Mr. Scheer would certainly continue that, and we've taken a very different approach. We recognize completely and agree with the Truth and Reconciliation report's recommendations. We would continue to work with Indigenous leadership, as I say, across Canada to fulfill exactly what you were talking about, and recognizing that as stewards of the land, they have passed down a body of knowledge that we need to look at and take very seriously if we are to truly address the challenge that is climate change. I'm glad later on in the Q&A to raise points relating to how we would help ensure that Indigenous communities are assisted with renewable energy and the like, because there is a plan in our platform to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Celine Mansoor from the People's Party of Canada.
Well, it was very interesting to hear Peter. In the world of Peter and his Prime Minister, they're not responsible for anything. It's always going back to Harper or going back to somebody else. The Indigenous people, the Native people, our First Nation, deserve to be treated fairly and with respect. Both the government, both the parties that have run the Canadian government, both the Liberals and the Conservative, have for the last 150 plus years treated the First Nation patronizingly. Peter doesn't understand that because Peter doesn't understand anything of anything much, because we never hear from him. What we will do is we're going to treat the natives with respect, with fairness, and we will listen to what they want for a solution to their problems.
Okay, so I know that we're going to have a rebuttal, and that'll be from Peter of the Liberal Party.
It will be.
Go ahead.
Rebuttal is okay.
Yeah.
I thought the rebuttal was later.
No,
Mr. Mansoor, I'm going to maintain a positive approach in this campaign. That's the tone that we need. This democracy is too vital. I'm sure we'll get into the issues. The People's Party, quite frankly, the question was on climate change. How many climate deniers do you have in your party? I mean, do you believe in climate change? Do you believe in the science? We need to work with Indigenous peoples. We all have to work together to bring about the changes that we need to address the challenge of our time, and that is climate change.
Okay, here's what we're going to say. We do need to move on in our line of
But I deserve a
questions.
response over here.
Hold on. I think what we can, there are more questions to come on the environment, and I'm sure you'll be able to. Mr. Mansoor, you'll have an opportunity to answer more questions regarding the environment and your party's campaign. We just need to move on. Sarah Bohari from the Conservative Party, please go ahead and answer Sarah
Don't turn this
Mansoor's.
into a charade.
Mr. Mansoor, we'll ask you to please keep decorum, okay? Ms. Bohari, after you.
Bukhari.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think it is a wonderful question. Issues of Indigenous people have been very close to my heart. I was, when I was teaching at a gen ed course at Humber College, I was teaching the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And it brought tears to my eyes. And what I would like to say is that Conservative Party supports the reconciliation process, and any reconciliation should start with economic reconciliation. And I also want to start this debate on a very positive note, but it hurts me, Peter, when you have been here for the past 4 years. What have you done for our Indigenous brothers and sisters? And I would like to bring up the Grassy Narrows issue, an area which is exposed to harmful mercury contamination for decades. The fact is that 90% of the people of Grassy Narrows are facing this. So
we'll need to cut off that thought there, and we'll give Peter Fragiskatos a chance to rebut the statement.
Well, what I will say, both to Mr. Mansoor and Ms. Bukhari, on the question of what have I done, the people in this community know very well what I have done. They have a champion for London and London North Centre. They have someone who's fought tirelessly for them every day. Now, you ask about Indigenous issues in particular, Ms. Bukhari. I'm not sure if you know the local organizations, the Namarin Friendship Center, and we also have at LOSA, 2 wonderful organizations in this city who have been assisted with federal funding. I've worked with that leadership, particularly at LOSA, and will continue to do so because I believe in these organizations.
Thank you very much.
I know this community.
And we'll stop that there, and we will go now to Durga Prout of the NDP.
Yes, that question is important. From pre-colonial days, Indigenous people have been good stewards of the land, and they have expressed a strong interest till present times to be continued stewards. In our platform is a true, we stress respect for Indigenous people, and so we will maintain the principles of the UN DRP, the principles of free and prior informed consent, and making sure that in our climate change plan, Indigenous people have a seat at the table. We plan to protect 30% of publicly owned land and fresh waters and oceans, and make sure that our climate change plan is science-based for greenhouse emission targets, and Indigenous people will have a seat at the table in developing our climate change plan. Thank you.
Next question from Craig Needles on the environment, and our first candidate to respond to this question will be Carol Dick of the Greens.
As you probably know, at the 2015 summit in Paris, Canada committed to cutting its national emissions by 30% below the 2005 levels by 2030. Now, various people in government would say that we are on track to hit that. Other experts, of course, say that is not the case. Do you believe that we need to hit that Paris target, and how should we do it?
Okay, first of all, we need to go beyond the Paris target. That is not enough. The UN has even said that we should be hitting a 60% target, and that is what the Green Party calls for. So 60% below our 2005 targets. And that is absolutely something that we can achieve. The first way that we can do that is by ending all fossil fuel subsidies. The next way that we can do this is to deal with retrofitting all of our buildings and improving public transportation and rail. We need to start using the money that is in fossil fuel industries to help people transition to other businesses so that we can have a national energy grid that by 2030 is 100% fueled by renewable energy. This is possible. And beyond that, we have a plan to get to net zero emissions by 2050. It is completely doable. It is going to be better for our economy. It's going to be better for environment. And we are going to have huge successes by doing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have Peter Fragiskatos of the Liberals.
Thank you very much. Much of what Carol said, much of what Carol just outlined, is already in motion. I said earlier in my rebuttal to Mr. Mansoor that I see and consider climate change to be the central challenge of our time. And our government has met that response with historic investments in solar and wind energy, in public transit. We were the first government in Canadian history to put a price on pollution. We have acted and want to continue to act. The alternative, and here we go back to the Harper years possibly, is that Canada was a fossil state. Literally, we were getting the fossil awards, if you remember, under Mr. Harper. We've turned an important corner. I also believe, and our party believes, in net zero by 2050. Perhaps the Greens want to rush the transition immediately, but there would be economic devastation that would result. We are talking about a transition that will not cause economic hardship. I know that everybody wants to work on this issue. We need to cooperate, and that's what the Liberal Party is talking about in this campaign. Thank you.
Okay, now to Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
Well, the People's Party position is that we are going to get out of the Paris Accord and we will let the provincial government take their responsibilities and decide for themselves in what way they want to meet the issues of carbon emission. I want to remind our friends here in London North Centre that was the issue in the last election, in the provincial election, and the people not only of London North Centre but across the province decided that they've had enough of Kathleen Wynne Liberal government and their policy, and that was simply another duplication of the federal government policy. And what they then decided was to basically clean the house, and Kathleen Wynne's Liberal Party lost its official status in Queen's Park. So it is the people closest to the government, that is the provincial government, they will then determine and decide how they want to act upon these matters.
And now to Sarah Bohari of the Conservatives.
The carbon tax is a failure of epic promotions. Make life more expensive for Canadians that at the end of the month, they don't have enough in their pocket to save for a house, pay for their kids, or save for their aging parents. I've heard from so many London North Centre people who want to fight climate change without being burdened by the Liberals' carbon tax. The Conservatives, a realplan.ca is the way to go. Technology, not taxes. That's a real plan. A cleaner and greener natural environment, taking the climate change fight global. It will not be free to pollute. There will be no sweetheart deals, just like under Justin Trudeau. Emitters who exceed our limits will be required to invest in technology that will lower emissions to fight climate change. Thank you.
Okay, and because I got a signal from Mr. Fragiskatos that he would like to rebut that remark.
Well, I think it's important to point out that the Conservative Party so-called climate change plan, although it's many pages, it's 60 pages long, would actually lead to an increase in emissions. You won't find that in the document. It's mostly pictures. But it will lead to an increase in emissions. The carbon tax that Sarah talks about is a price on pollution. You get a rebate to make the transition affordable. It's an idea championed by Preston Manning, who's certainly not a Liberal, but understands the value of championing climate change. We need to work on these things together.
Thank you. And now to Dirk Prout of the NDP.
The New Democrat platform recognizes that we can fight climate change and fight equality and create good jobs which will improve the economy. We definitely need to exceed those climate targets. They are inadequate. They will leave us 200 years behind by 2030. We plan to bring in science-based emissions targets done in consultation with indigenous peoples. We need to end, and we plan to end fossil fuel subsidies and use that money instead to look at jobs and creating help for people who have been displaced from the oil economy and create new jobs in the green economy. We want to electrify transit so we have more zero-emission vehicles and retrofit housing. In fact, all new housing built under the NDP government will be net zero by 2030. We plan to make big polluters pay, because if you want to fight climate change, you got to fight it like you want to win it.
Okay. On to our third question in this round, and that will be from Jennifer. Oh, I'm so sorry. Did you? Yeah. My apologies.
So I would like to say that it is not adequate to just reach the Paris Climate Accord goals. We need to go much further than that, and we also need to acknowledge the role that military has in pollution. We do not need new fighter jets. They're horrible for the environment. And the Liberals have increased military spending by 75% over 5 years. Why are we doing that? Where are those resources going? We need to focus the military less on polluting and more on search and rescue.
And we'll have 30 seconds for Mr. Fragaskatos to reply.
It is certainly the case that the Liberal Party has increased military spending. We have a defense strategy, strong, secure, engaged, and Canadians called for that, and we delivered. Because I only have 30 seconds, you talk about disasters and climate change. Vehicles produced in this city will be sent to operations dealing with flooding and wildfires, produced here at General Dynamics. We just provided a contract to the company to make 360 vehicles just a few weeks ago. That'll sustain 2,000 jobs. We can do this. We need to work together.
Okay. Also, I know that there's some frustration because of the limited amount of time to reply back and forth, so I do apologize for that if you feel like there's something else you wanted to add to it, but these are the constraints that we're dealing with, Clara. And again, I apologize for overlooking in the order there. We're just going to make sure that I've not forgotten anyone. Jen. Jen Beeman from the London Free Press, you are asking the next question, and Peter Fragaskatos of the Liberals is our first to respond. So, Jennifer, go ahead.
The Great Lakes are a precious resource and a shared one. Algae blooms, invasive species, Asian carp. We depend on our American neighbors to monitor and also address these serious concerns. How will your government work with the U.S. administration, whether it's a Republican administration or a Democrat, to protect the Great Lakes?
The Great Lakes are indeed a precious resource, part of how we define ourselves as Southwestern Ontarians, if I can put it that way, relates to the Great Lakes. We want to continue an environmental agenda that stays focused on all of these things, including our waters. And in fact, our government has engaged in a dialogue with the United States on such matters. I know that we haven't gotten to a point yet in the dialogue where the issue has been completely resolved, but we want to continue this work. And that relates to waters, it relates to the whole issue around climate change. It relates to everything that we take seriously when it comes to the environmental stewardship of this land, and I believe in that approach.
Thank you very much. Next, we have our answer from Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
It's a very good question, Jennifer, and it points out too that there is a lack of consensus on this matter globally. The Chinese, the Indians, the Nigerians, the Africans, and of course, as you have pointed out, the United States government, both the Democrats and the Republicans, going all the way back to Kyoto, refused to sign any of those agreements. It seems to be that on our side, the Liberal government is so busy in virtue signaling that it is about to or ready to bankrupt our economy, and what's happening on the basis of this contested idea which is not proven about climate change. That's why our position is to hand it over to the provincial government. It is their responsibility. We are a federation. It is not simply that the federal government decides everything. The provincial government has its jurisdiction, and they are also going to be responsible in deciding which way they go.
Okay. I am correct in thinking you want a rebuttal. Okay, Peter.
Very quickly, on the whole climate change issue, really, we have to get past this in Canada. Let's believe in the science once and for all. The climatologists have been telling us for decades, climate change is real. Let's believe in the science, let's believe in the research. As for your words about bankruptcy, and Canada's the best fiscal position right now, the best economic position in the entire G7, Mr. Mansoor. We are growing last quarter at a rate of close to 4%. So those are the facts. Let's believe in facts.
Okay, and Sarah Bokhari of the Conservative Party.
Thank you. I think it's a very good question. Great Lakes is a precious resource in Canada, and Conservative Party would like to work with US without giving any concessions to the United States, just like the Liberal Party give in our dairy industry. We would like to work together for Great Lakes, but without giving any concessions to the United States on an equal and term basis. Thank you.
Okay, Peter.
The facts are the facts, and we need to stay focused on facts. When the Conservative government was arguing, whether it was Mr. Scheer or Mr. Harper, visiting Washington and trying to tell the Canadian government how to approach NAFTA, they argued that we should capitulate to everything that Mr. Trump asked us to do. We did not do that. The result is a revised NAFTA that has preserved thousands of jobs in Canada. Again, that is what's happened. Those are the facts.
All right, and Durga Prout of the NDP.
Thank you for that important question. The NDP recognizes that the Great Lakes is of significant importance, not only for the municipalities that ring the Great Lakes, but also industries that depend on it for manufacturing, using the water for manufacturing and other processes. Therefore, whatever we do, we must have consultations with not only our prominent scientists who are experts on marine issues, our indigenous people that surround the Great Lakes, and also the municipalities and businesses that extract water from the Great Lakes. So our policies must be rooted in science and the needs of all these different stakeholders, and it must be written into our free trade agreements, because this is international jurisdiction. You must ensure that free trade agreements protect both the rights of indigenous peoples to water and the environment.
Thank you very much. Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
So I'd like to say that we need to keep corporations away from the Great Lakes, and the position of the Communist Party is that we would ban all water exports from the Great Lakes. As well, if a communist government were elected, we would have to treat the United States with caution, because they're putting immigrants in concentration camps right now, and Canada shouldn't play a role in this.
Carol Dick of the Greens.
So in the 1990s, Canada and the US were able to come together to work on an agreement to deal with acid rain. This was very monumental, and I feel like it can happen again. We do have a bit of a problem right now with some pushback coming from the south, but in the meantime, we can do our part to improve the water quality of our Great Lakes. The first thing that we can do is obviously work with our agricultural sector and the farmers. If we start doing away with some of the factory farm practices that we're doing, this will significantly improve the water quality of the Great Lakes, because we will not be having the runoff moving into our rivers and lakes. The other thing is that we have very high levels of plastics in our Great Lakes, and we need to start addressing some of those issues regarding our personal use of plastics and the fabrics that we have and the runoff that goes into the lakes. But we can work with the United States on this, just like we did with acid rain.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of the environment portion of the evening. We will now move on to economy. Our first question is from Sarah May Chitty, and our first candidate to respond is Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
So earlier this year, Romeo Saganache's private members bill C-262, which would align Canadian law with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, it died in its final stage, most notably because the Conservative Party voted against it, saying that this would get in the way of economic development because of the stipulations of free and prior informed consent. So could you speak to how you will approach free and prior informed consent and UNDRIP going forward?
Well, as I said earlier on, that our position is to engage with the First Nation people with fairness and respect. And what we want to see is that our economy grow, our job grow. We want to get our natural resource economy growing across the country. We want to come into agreement with the First Nation people in terms of their claims, property rights in their reservation, and that they participate in the economic growth that we believe we can bring about through deregulation and opening up the economy, instead of constraining our economy by policies that we have seen this government engaged in over the last 4 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, Sarah Bohari of the Conservative Party.
Thank you very much. As I said earlier, that any kind of reconciliation with our Indigenous communities means economic reconciliation. And Andrew Scheer announced the National Energy Corridor to carry Canadian energy and resources from coast to coast. It will generate economic and social benefits for not only the entire country, particularly our Indigenous communities, and it will be moving oil, gas, hydroelectricity, and potentially accommodating other linear infrastructure, and it will greatly help our Indigenous communities through this. Thank you.
Okay. Durga Proud of the NDP.
Free, prior, and informed consent is something that's written in several international conventions, not just UNDRIP. It's also written into the International Labor Thing 169 and Biodiversity Convention from the United Nations. UNDRIP has minimum standards to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples. So I think it's incumbent that we, in whatever we do, we incorporate that into our thinking and policies. Indigenous people are looking for self-determination. And in that, they want to have their full autonomy, their full human rights, and their access to resources not curtailed. A lot of that is circumscribed and described in UNDRIP, and we must adopt it.
Now to Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
We need to respect the rights of Indigenous people to sovereignty and self-determination. There's been a lot of hollow words over the last century about that, and we need to actually act on it. We need to stop all developments on Indigenous lands that have no consent and no right to be there, and we need to implement to the fullest extent the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People.
Carol Dick of the Greens.
So the Green Party is completely dismayed that UNDRIP did not pass all the way through into the Canadian government and the law. This should have happened a long time ago. It is really unacceptable that it has taken this long and that we still haven't got there. First Nations people need to be on a nation-to-nation basis with the Canadian government. That means always allowing them first and prior consent to any development projects going forward. It is absolutely not acceptable that we have not got UNDRIP in our government yet.
Okay. Peter Fragascatos of the Liberals.
The United Nations Declaration and recognizing it as fundamental to reconciliation in this country. 150 years of a broken relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples. We need to do better. We were absolutely supportive of the bill that you mentioned, Mr. Saganache. In fact, I remember when he put it forward in Parliament, all of us went over, except the Conservatives, quite frankly, all of us went over and congratulated him. He's a good man, and it was a very good initiative. Unfortunately, Andrew Scheer stood in the way of the bill becoming law because his senators blocked it, and that's unacceptable. So all of us need to as I say, work on these issues. The Greens have a good position on it. The NDP has a good position on it. Within the first year of our mandate, we would make sure it's law as Liberals.
Thank you very much. And now a rebuttal from Sarah Bakhati of the Conservative Party.
I would like to take my audience to Stephen Harper, who was the person who apologized to survivors of the residential schools. It was an amazing opportunity in history where a prime minister of a country apologized to the survivors of the residential schools. Thank you.
Okay. All right, on to our next question from Craig Needles. And our first to respond will be Sarah Bakhati of the Conservative Party.
In August, which is the most recent data we have, the workforce participation rate in the City of London was just over 58%, which is the lowest in the country. Sadly, that is slightly above where we sat most of the summer, which is roughly at 57%. Why is the labor force participation rate in London so low, and what can we do about it?
That's a very good question, and our Conservative Party has a plan. The plan is we are going to create jobs, and how are we going to create jobs? We are going to repeal the carbon tax, repeal Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines bill. We're going to end the ban on shipping traffic in British Columbia, establish clear timelines and get Indigenous consultations right up front, ban foreign-funded advocacy groups from disrupting our approval processes, and we are looking also for energy independence by 2030.
Thank you very much, and I'll just take this moment to remind our audience to please put your phones on silent. Just a, quick reminder on that one. I'll make sure mine's off too, no exceptions, everyone's equal. And also, if you could please try and, our candidates are in the middle of speaking, and when they're giving an answer, we're treating this seriously. So please, if you can refrain from expressing yourselves in any audible way other than applause at the end of their answer, if that is what you choose to do. Now, Durga Prout with the NDP, please.
Yes. This is a complex issue. One of the things that is definitely needed is an industrial strategy. The NDP has that in our platform. We see that in 2015, when Justin Trudeau came to London, he said that they're moving away from manufacturing. So we lost a lot of things here, and we're still hurting. So we want an industrial strategy that's in our platform. It's one that's going to talk about how we are going to create an advanced, low-carbon economy. But in the immediate present, what we want to look at is building more affordable homes. That could put a lot of people to work, and retrofitting homes to make them more energy efficient will also put a lot of things to work. And having a better transportation network between major cities will connect us to major hubs where there are jobs.
Thank you very much. To Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
The Communist Party's position on this is that we would want to build a full employment strategy based on massive public investments and value-added jobs in environmentally sustainable manufacturing and secondary industry. We'd want to rebuild Canada's public infrastructure and build 1 million affordable housing units, and we'd want to introduce plant closure legislation with teeth to make sure that companies cannot just close up shop and leave jobs.
Carol Dick of the Green Party.
So one of the issues with London is that it's kind of separate from the major hubs like Toronto and Kitchener and Windsor. And part of that has to do with our rail system. If we want to get companies to invest in London, to bring jobs, to create meaningful employment for our young graduates so that they don't leave to Toronto and the other larger cities, what we need to have is a very quick, high-speed rail system that connects London to other major centers so that we can move people quickly, we can move products quickly, and we can start investing in our economy. Part of creating some of the jobs as well, and for our plan, is to deal with retrofitting a lot of the buildings that we have here in London, building new technologies, creating new affordable housing, rehabilitating housing that we have seen in the past weeks in the news that need a lot of repairs. So there are opportunities, but first we need to make sure that London is connected quickly to our major hubs.
Peter Fragaskatos of the Liberals.
On housing, the point has come up, and I'm not sure if it'll come up again. The comments made are sensible. We need housing in London, but that's already happening through the National Housing Strategy. Craig, your specific question was on labor force participation in London. We have challenges, like any community. St. Catharines is in a similar position. If you look at our economic history, I think you find the answer. A loss of manufacturing jobs, but also a loss of jobs in past decades in the financial sector. The insurance sector was strong here. The banking sector was strong here. Those jobs left. So we've got to focus on what we're doing well right now. And we have transitioned in important ways. The health research sector is strong. The tech sector is strong. We need to continue to support those sectors. And the advanced manufacturing businesses across the city have started to really pick up. I've worked with a number of them to secure federal investment and contracts. I mentioned one before. Continue to do that work. That'll be my focus.
Thank you very much. Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
Well, London was one of the busy industrial hubs of southwestern Ontario, but 4 terms of McGuinty Wynne Liberals drove up our utility rates sky high, made our city, in terms of investment, low. 75% of foreign investment have flown out of the country in the last 4 years of the Liberal government in Ottawa. So the combination of all that had made London suffer in terms of what you are pointing out. But Sarah Bukhari on my left wouldn't know that because she is, again, not a Londoner who has been dropped into London, and so she has no clue of what was happening in London before Dalton McGuinty government. And of course, Peter is not going to talk about what his government's economic policy have done to make our investment flow go down in this part of the world.
Okay. This is new. We'll do 2. So we'll start with Peter because the initial comment was directed towards the Liberal government, and then we will come to Sarah Bahati for your rebuttal. So Peter, go ahead first.
Sure. On foreign investment, the fact, and again I emphasize that word, the fact is that Canada, according to the International Monetary Fund, is a magnet for foreign investment. As for the past 4 years, Mr. Mansoor, we have seen no less than close to $1 billion worth of federal investment for improved infrastructure, for helping our businesses either to sustain our current workforce or to add to that. Our tech sector has been supported and our health research has been supported by this federal government. I'll continue to focus on those things.
Thank you very much. And now Sarah Bahati.
I feel very important, Salim, that you're pointing at me. Looks like I'm going to get the position this time. You're making me feel important. The reality is that Mr. Mansoor was disqualified by the Conservative Party because he's been saying some questionable things for the ethnic communities. And that is why I've always wanted to be in London. Being an academic, University of Western Ontario is the best place I've always wanted to be. Being a recent widow, I lost my husband 3 years ago. London offers cheaper pastures. Thank you.
We will move on to our next question from Jennifer Beeman of the London Free Press, and our first to respond will be Durga Prout of the NDP.
London's at the center of an agricultural powerhouse. You guys are seeking a seat in an area where we export, and you know, it's really an important industry here. But we've had some problems lately south of the border. There's an escalating trade war with China, and Canada's had its own fractures with Huawei and Meng Wanzhou. So the grain farmers of Ontario are calling on parties to build a trade war fund to protect non-supply managed industries from global trade influences. I want to know what your party would do to make sure southwestern Ontario's agricultural sector can withstand the changing tides of global trade.
So that's a pretty interesting question. And I think when I talk about, spoke earlier about an industrial strategy, part of what needs to be included in that is the agricultural sector. No country can survive if it cannot adequately feed itself, and this is something that the New Democrats do recognize, and we have in our plan strategies to do things like help succession planning for people who want to maintain their family farms, and encourage young people and women to be involved in farming. We also want to connect farms with local food hubs and communities. So we have a thriving domestic sector here. I think that is one way to build in resilience, even if there are some downtimes and trade fights with China or other places, that we have a strong, robust local economy in agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
To me, it's quite simple. We need to disassociate from every agreement with the United States. We need to get out of the USMCA. We need to get out of NAFTA. We need to get out of NATO. The United States is just going to drag Canada down, and we need to have an independent policy.
Carol Dick of the Green Party.
The Green Party sees the importance of building up our local sustainable agriculture and making sure that we are actually getting our food closer to the source. Our platform calls for substituting 30% of our current agricultural imports with domestic agriculture. If we do this, there is going to be less food waste through transportation. There is going to be less greenhouse gas emissions because of transmission, and people are going to have healthier, fresher food. At the same time, it's going to help build up our small agricultural farms. We can offer lots of incentives for people to stay in the family farms, to shift to organic, to help get food into the local farming, like the farmers markets. There's a lot of things that we can do to really build up our local agriculture so that we do not have to deal with the whims of the United States.
Peter Fragascatos of the Liberals.
While the Conservative Party and especially the People's Party has called for the end to supply management, which, let's be clear, if that happened, it would devastate southwestern Ontario. We are the party that introduced supply management. We're the party that defended it when Donald Trump wanted to absolutely end that system. We stood up for our farmers and will continue to do it. You mentioned, Jennifer, the agri-food sector in southwestern Ontario, and London can really benefit. In fact, it already is. One of the proudest achievements of the past 4 years for me was working on a federal investment to secure over 1,000 jobs in this community through Maple Leaf Foods. They're going to be opening very soon, and that's jobs for Londoners working with local farmers. The agri-food sector is absolutely vital to this, to our local economy, and will continue to be that way. If I'm re-elected, you can absolutely believe that I'll keep fighting for that sector and this city along with it, because we are an agri-food city too.
Okay. I will say we have a rebuttal from Celine Mansoor, but then you also have your minute, so we'll very much delineate those two chunks of time. So Andrew will start on the 30-second rebuttal.
Well, I just want to point out to the audience, especially the audience at home, there you have Peter and his party talking from one end of the mouth about the people, and on the other end of the mouth defending the cartel. You should go and speak to the mothers who have to pay $2.99 for a dozen of eggs, and then just across the border it is 49 cents. So that's the double game that these people play, you know. In NAFTA, this was an issue of discussion, and that's Justin Trudeau refused to discuss this because they were defending the cartel at the expense of the common people.
Okay, and now you have 1 minute to answer the question that was asked by Jennifer Beeman. Yeah.
To Peter.
No, you were rebutting, I think. So now you have an opportunity to answer the actual question.
It was about supporting industries that could be impacted by trade wars with China. So Grain Farmers of Ontario wants a fund. I want to know where your party stands on really protecting these agri-food sectors from fluctuations in the global economy.
Well, here we have, I mean, the classic case of General Dynamics, which was the largest contract signed in terms with Saudi Arabia in terms of exporting light armored vehicles. And it is this government that was basically throwing away that jobs, you know. I mean, this is of something like, you know, right across southwestern Ontario, the supply chain for General Dynamics here, right here in London. And all that Peter was doing was standing like a deer with his eyes caught in the headlight, you know. So that's how this government has been dealing with the question of jobs and manufacturing and employment in the London area, in southwestern Ontario.
All right, I think by the end of this, we're all going to feel like ping pong balls back and forth, but Peter Fragiskatos now has an opportunity to rebut that statement.
I'm not sure where to begin. I have to offer a rebuttal, but the question was on supply management, Mr. Mansoor. Now, you did bring me into it, and I have to, well, I'm glad you did, because I can remind you and tell the folks here who know already where I've been on the issue of GDLS, defending London workers every step of the way. The 2,000 plus people that work there, the thousands more in the supply chain, I had their back every step of the way. You just are not informed, sir, with the greatest respect. You're not informed.
Okay, we are moving on now to Sarah Bahari of the Conservative Party, and she will be answering Jennifer Beeman's question on supply management and local agriculture. Protecting it.
Our agriculture, our farmers, our dairy farmers are the backbone of Canadian economy and Canadian industry. And the only thing is that whenever we should not be given these concessions to the US, as the Liberal Party has done. We have to take care of our farmers who are feeding our Canadian population. That's all I have to say. No more concessions given to US and taking the side of our farmers and our agriculturists. Thank you.
Okay, and Peter, I believe you're indicating that you would like...
To secure NAFTA, we had to make sure that we secured this country's economy. When you point out that we have open concessions and you talk about supply management, Ms. Bukhari, I'm sorry, there's also compensation that this government offered to farmers that were negatively impacted by that. We're the government that got CETA done, the TPP done, and the NAFTA renegotiation done. And you can talk to farmers in this region. They are satisfied with the result, and they're going to prosper.
Okay, thank you very much. That comes to an end, or brings to an end, the economy section. On to infrastructure spending, and this section has 2 questions. And again, each candidate will have a minute to respond, and should there be any opportunities for rebuttal, they will have 30 seconds to do so. So Sarah May Chitty will ask the first question regarding infrastructure spending, and Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party is our first to respond.
So this morning before I left for work, I watched the police clear out the homeless crew behind my house. So my question is in regards to infrastructure spending on housing. From a federal level, there are a lot of influences on housing, and I am just wondering how you're going to how you're going to change the systemic issues that will soon result in average Canadians being unable to afford a roof over their head.
So that's a very complicated question, but the thing that we would want to do if elected would use federal powers to create as much emergency shelters as possible to deal with the housing crisis in London. We'd want to build 1 million units of affordable social housing because that's such a big issue facing the people, not just of this riding, but of this entire country right now.
Thank you very much. Carol Dick of the Green Party.
So we have a number of different policies to deal with housing and all different areas of housing. One thing that we would like to see is a Minister of Housing to head over the National Housing Strategy. That way they could work to enact the policies that best reflect the situations in each province. We would like to see a massive increase in affordable housing, 25,000 new affordable homes per year and 15,000 rehabilitated per year nationally. This would be over the span of 10 years. At the same time, we advocate a housing-first strategy to deal with people that are suffering from homelessness. We understand that it is impossible to get a job or to get an education or to get the proper kind of health care that you need if you do not have a home. So with a housing-first strategy, we would get people off the streets and then get them the medical care they need. It would be tied to our basic guaranteed income to get them into a good situation. Thank you.
Peter Fragiskatos of the Liberals.
Previous federal governments, liberal and conservative, I'll be quite clear on that, abdicated the responsibility when it comes to building affordable housing units and repairing existing ones in Canada until this government. We have made the building and repair of affordable housing units right across Canada a priority. The other parties are talking about building units and repairing existing units. That work is already happening in this community through the National Housing Strategy. If I'm re-elected, I'll continue to fight for that. We've already announced 6 affordable housing complexes in London. They're either constructed or under construction, and we'll continue to seize the moment to make sure that we bring in more investment to continue that. The other area of concern is the way that housing has been administered in this city. I don't want to go into the weeds on this, but those that follow the issue know there's been challenges around that. I want that resolved before I go and fight for further funding to repair and upgrade existing stock that's deeply in need of repair. No question about it, but I'm there to fight.
Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
Well, we cannot talk about affordable housing, especially for those who can least afford them, without talking about what this government has been doing in terms of global migration, signing up with the UN Compact on Global Migration, opening up our borders to migrants, and then all of our urban centers, including London, affected by this flow of migration into the country, and then the government dumping them on the provincial government, and the provincial government then downloading it on the municipal government. And that's where our crisis is. Throwing more money at it is simply going to increase the deficit and our debt. We're already paying something like $30 billion annually on our deficits and our debt, and that is going to keep on increasing. So it is talking about this. We're simply passing the bill down to future generations without looking at the core problem. To look at the core problem, we have to bite the bullet and understand where we are as a country.
Okay, and Peter Fragascatos, 30 seconds to rebut.
Mr. Mansoor, there are not affordable housing challenges in this city because of immigrants, which is what you're implying in your response. Immigrants built this country. All of us. Our diversity, our embrace of multiculturalism, that's what's built this country. We're stronger because of our diversity. I wish my conservative colleague would intervene, especially on points like this. I mean, the People's Party, we know where they stand, but by staying silent, Ms. Bakari, you basically excuse the comment.
She's next. She's next.
Okay, well, please say something. I mean, immigration built Canada.
Bell. And now to Sarah Bahati of the Conservative Party.
Absolutely, immigration builds Canada. I am originally from Pakistan, a small town called Multan. So I am a participant of building Canadian economy. As far as house affordability is concerned, I'm coming out today. I do not own a house because I cannot afford it. And in the past 4 years, Liberals have made it very difficult for people to afford houses. Justin Trudeau is just not as advertised. Their heavy-handed mortgage stress test, their raising of mortgage insurance premiums, and their punishing new taxes on middle-class Canadians have made it harder and harder to realize the dream of homeownership. Andrew Scheer's government, Conservative Party, we have a 4-point plan to make houses affordable, and I would like to talk to you later about this. Thank you.
Mr. Fragascatos, you wanted to rebut. 30 seconds.
On housing affordability and what the federal government has done to address it, yes, there is a stress test, but we put in place a stress test for one very clear reason. The Bank of Canada was deeply concerned about household debt levels, which are high in Canada. And so, yes, we acted in response to that advice. Beyond that, we have the first-time homebuyers incentive, and I won't get into the technicalities. All of you will know it or have heard of it. It's a great program that helps first-time homebuyers buy a home with the government's help, not through a grant, but through a loan. It's an excellent program. It's already started, and I know people in this community are using it.
Thank you very much. Dirk Prout now of the NDP.
Yes, thank you. Housing is certainly a crisis here. We've seen the lowest 10% of income earners seeing their income fall between 1981 and 2016. And for the middle 50%, their incomes have been stagnant. So it's really important to deal with this issue. It affects not only the poor and the middle class, but students as well, because that's a sizable amount of their student loans. And the City of London and social services agencies effectively dealing with housing. You've heard us talk about building 500,000 units of affordable housing that's also energy efficient. We plan to retrofit the existing housing stock to make them energy efficient. This is important because people spend too much of their money heating and cooling. We want to build more emergency shelters for people who are facing gender-based violence, and we need to enforce the National Building Code on reserves. As an engineer, I find it's very disappointing that this is not done. Housing is a human right.
Okay. Our next question in this round is from Craig Needles, and our first to respond will be Carol Dick of the Green Party.
I'm sure I don't need to remind you, but we had a pretty significant debate over rapid transit in this community, and it took many, many years. And we wound up going from let's do a light rail transit system to let's do a hybrid system to let's do a bus-only system to let's do a bus-only system that doesn't go to Masonville Mall or the West End. So clearly it degenerated over time. Do you regret where we wound up? And if you were sitting in government when this conversation was going on, would we have hypothetically wound up in a different spot, or at least would you have hoped that we would have wound up in a different spot?
Yeah, 100%. So many of you know that I ran in the provincial election last year, and it was the hot topic, BRT, 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 and also light rail. Absolutely, we need a better transit system in London. It is the largest city without a proper functioning transit system. We need this not just to build our economy, but also to deal with greenhouse gas emissions. We need it to move students. We need it to move workers. We need it for seniors. Part of the Green Party policy is to help get funds to the cities. They need stable funding for public transportation. They cannot have it taken away from them. They can't have it so that they have to just plan 2 years, 5 years in advance. They need to have a concrete plan that they can work towards with 10 years, 20 years down the line. And that means shifting to electric transportation, increasing buses, and improving our rail system. Peter Fragascatos of the Liberals.
The largest ever federal investment in this city was for transit. I know that because in March of 2017, I helped to secure that investment for over $200 million. Now, a portion of that $123 million will go to the revised plan of Mayor Holder and this current council. Is it a perfect plan? It is not perfect. And Craig, you and I have discussed this at length over the past 4 years. We have arrived at a certain place in the conversation. The current city council saw that there was not community consensus on the Shift BRT plan, revised, and found a plan that has general agreement. Is it perfect? Has it left certain people disappointed? No question. But we're going to do better in this city on transit. And in addition, it's not just a transit plan. It's a plan that provides new pathways for cyclists and more transportation efficiencies for drivers. You won't have to wait behind the train anymore at Adelaide and Central because you'll have an underpass, thanks to the federal government and thanks to the city council. And we'll continue to work with the city on these issues.
Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
Well, we maintain that these questions are best dealt with between Queen's Park and our city. That's the provincial responsibility. We do not believe that the federal government should be dictating and directing these efforts. We will download, we will give the share in the equalization payment fairly to all the provinces, and this is something to be negotiated between the provincial government and the city governments, and not for the federal government to fine-tune, to interfere, to dictate.
Sarah Bahati of the Conservative Party.
When I will be elected, I will fight for London North Centre roads and transportation. And I guarantee you that London will get its fair share of infrastructure money under our government. For every $100 that Justin Trudeau promises on infrastructure, he only spends $60. He is not as advertised. Under our government, you will get what you're promised. Thank you.
And we will go to Peter Fragascatos of the Liberals to have a rebuttal.
I appreciate the opportunity, Ms. Bakari, again, because it allows me to highlight for you that this government has put forward the most ambitious infrastructure agenda in Canada's history, a $180 billion plan. It's a decade-long plan for better roads, better bridges, better transit, better water systems, all sorts of things to better connect this country. A country that doesn't invest in its infrastructure is not a country that remains modern. And as to the other points, I'll simply just wait because there's just too much that you've articulated tonight that's false.
Thank you very much. We will now go to Dirk Prout of the NDP.
Thank you for that question. You know, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities have been asking for stable, permanent funding for infrastructure, particularly transportation, and that is something that is included in the NDP platform. Transportation is good, effective transportation is important. It's an equity issue for people living with poverty, youth, seniors, and women. Businesses in London have, in the past few years, it's been reported in the London Free Press, have to let go people because, or people have left them actually, because they can't get transportation to jobs. So it's essential for our economy. We will work with municipalities to electrify their transit system and move them to clean sources. Eventually, if any municipality wants free transit, the NDP is willing to work with them. Transportation is something that is critical to our economy and it must be invested in.
Thank you very much. And now, Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
I want to say, as a transit user, I'm really disappointed with transit in this city. There's cities half the size of London that have bus rapid transit, yet we're just getting it. We need more than that. We need to eliminate transit fees. We need to invest in high-speed rail. We need to build interurban and urban rapid transit vehicles.
We have, let's see, 3 more sections to go, but a couple of them have reduced questions. So this next half should move a little bit faster, as we'll find out though. So we're starting off with the topic of healthcare. This section has 3 questions, so each of our panelists will ask a question of our candidates. We will begin with Sarah May Chitty, and our first candidate to respond will be Peter Fragascatos in the order.
Okay, so the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found the federal government guilty of discrimination against Indigenous children because of the inability to implement Jordan's Principle properly, which would create equality for these children in health and other services such as housing, which are determinants of health for human beings. So the government has yet to recognize recommendations that Cindy Blackstock, who has been in charge of fighting this fight in court. So what will you do to change this inequality for Indigenous children accessing health care and the other unequal and inadequate policies that are determinants of their health?
Thank you very much. There is much more work that needs to be done to recognize Jordan's Principle and have that principle completely lived in this country, if I can put it that way. Governments have failed, and our government needs to do more. Certainly, our party needs to do more, rather, and if we're re-elected, we will. But we have made record investments in improved health services, housing services on reserve and off reserve, and education services. This is an issue that cannot be addressed in 1 year or 4 years. We need to continue to work together. And I mentioned it before, 150 years is what it took to destroy the relationship between Indigenous peoples in Canada and the rest of Canada. We have, I believe, come to a point in our country's history because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because of the great activism that Indigenous peoples throughout this country have carried out, where hopefully we've reached a turning point. Much more needs to be done, but we're ready to act. The Conservatives won't even meet with Indigenous leaders.
Okay, thank you very much. Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
Well, on the healthcare issue, our position is that we have to be reminded that we are a federation, that it is the province's responsibility to deliver the health care. It is the Federation's responsibility to see that through equalization payment, all the provinces get their fair share. We do not want to see the Canada Health Act become a central directed policy for all the provinces. The provinces should be able to innovate. The provinces should be able to deliver the services as and how the people in the provinces request. For instance, in Ontario, this whole issue of wait time has become a crisis. And it is the provincial government that has to find the way to meet that crisis. And we in the federal should be there to help, in a sense, the provincial governments to find a way to do that instead of trying to direct them from the top down.
Sarah Bahati of the Conservative Party.
I think, again, it's a very sensitive question. I have my 14-year-old daughter right here, so I know the plight of children. I know the plight of Indigenous children. And Conservative Party absolutely believes in the Jordan's principle, which means that the Indigenous children should have the same right to housing, should have the same right to clean drinking water, should have the same right for health services, just like all children in Canada. How can I say that my daughter can have all those facilities and a child living in our reserves, an Indigenous child, should not have access to clean drinking water? Why should my daughter have access to clean drinking water? And again, I would like to assert that it was Prime Minister Stephen Harper who apologized for the treatment of children in residential schools. Thank you.
Durga Proud of the NDP.
So Canadians want meaningful reconciliation, as do the Indigenous peoples that live in Canada. It is really lamentable that the CHRT has ordered government to equally fund Indigenous children seven times since 2016. We commit to ending discrimination against Indigenous children and young people and families, and an NDP government will fully implement the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal orders, which order the Canadian government to stop chronic underfunding of child welfare services on reserve and to work with First Nations Child and Family Services to implement the Spirit Bear Plan. We will also fully implement Jordan's principle and make sure that we work with provinces and territories to make sure that Indigenous children get the equitable healthcare services that they deserve and need.
To Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
A communist government would take emergency action to improve living conditions, employment, health, education, and housing of Indigenous peoples, and immediately would end the racist and discriminatory cap on educational and health funding for First Nations treaty children.
Carol Dick of the Green Party.
The Green Party would fully enact Jordan's principle. It is completely unacceptable that a child that is First Nations, whether on reserve or off reserve, does not have the same access to health care because there is squabbling happening between the federal, provincial, or municipal governments. We would fully enact all the calls that are coming from the Assembly of First Nations for their honoring promises that came out for this election for 2019. A lot of those address the healthcare issues that we need to look at. One of the major things we have to address from the absolute core of making sure that First Nations people have access to a healthy life is addressing poverty. Poverty is the #1 determinant of healthcare issues, and if we don't make sure that people have safe housing, food security, and money in their pockets, there are going to be health effects from that. So we must look at poverty first.
Our next question from Craig Needles, and our first candidate to respond will be Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
There has been a long conversation over several federal elections, and there's been a lot of promises surrounding a national pharmacare program, which advocates say would save a lot of Canadian families a lot of money. Do you believe that Canada needs a national pharmacare program?
Well, I believe that whatever people want, they want, and the government will try to give. But the question is, where will the revenue come from? That's the hard question that we are not asking ourselves. It's all about spending. But where is the revenue, the income come from? The People's Party is concerned about that. Our deficit is now, deficit and debt, the total deficit and debt is reaching almost our GDP level. As I said, that we are spending $30 billion annually, that is only at the federal level, to service our debt and deficit. Add to that the provincial government expenditures across the country. So yes, we need pharmacare and we need whatever else you want to talk about. The healthcare cost is escalating as a population is aging and so forth and so on. But unless we bite the bullet on where we are going to get the income, all this is a fairy tale.
Okay, Sarah Bahati of the Conservative Party.
So healthcare is very close to my heart. 3 years ago, I lost my husband to the healthcare system, and since then, I took a resolve that I will stand for a Canadian healthcare system and I will try to make it better. Now, coming back to pharmacare, who wouldn't like free pharmacare? It looks like utopian, and again, where are we going to find the funds? Do you want to be taxed more? How many taxes can we afford to give? So there has to be a solution with all parties sitting together if we want to have a pharmacare. But as far as our conservative platform is concerned, Andrew Scheer's Health and Social Program Guarantee is a commitment to maintain and increase the Canada Health Transfer and Canada Social Transfer by 3% per year. Thank you.
Dirk Prout of the NDP.
Yes, thank you for your question. So it's not about what I believe, and I do believe we need a national pharmacare plan, but what Canadians need and what they ask for. 80% of Canadians have asked for a national pharmacare plan. We cannot ignore this definite majority. We have a situation now where we have a piecemeal pharmacare plan because government is too close to insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies who are taking advantage of us. We need a government plan that is on your side for pharmacare. This piecemeal pharmacare has got to stop. When you have universal pharmacare, you have less people cutting up pills and winding up in an emergency for things that could have been treated if they could have been available, could have been afforded their their medication in the first place. You should go to your pharmacist with your health card, not your credit card.
Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
We need a universal pharmacare program, full stop. But I'd like to say, because there's a lot of talk about where the money is going to come from, 4 simple words: make the rich pay.
Carol Dick of the Green Party.
The Green Party 100% promotes a national universal pharmacare plan. The reason why we need this is because it actually saves our government money if people have access to the medications they need. I'm going to use an example for why this is important. My mother has multiple sclerosis. She was on medications that cost more than what she was getting for disability when she had to leave her job as an elementary school teacher. The cost of not having that medication would mean that she would be in the hospital in an emergency situation. People with multiple sclerosis have a lot of negative side effects that do land them in the hospitals. If you have access to the medicines that you need, whether it's for your heart, for diabetes, for anything, it actually puts less strain on the government. The way to pay for this, as it has been asked, we raise our corporate tax rate from 15% to 21% to be in line with the American government. We cut subsidies to fossil fuels. We put a 0.5% tax on our financial transactions. And those are just a few of the ways we can pay for social services.
Peter Fragascatos of the Liberals.
It's time for pharmacare. We know that now. Canada has taken, in its history, very important steps to making sure that all of those in need when it comes to healthcare matters have that public healthcare system that's there to protect them. But we haven't gone far enough. So yes, our party believes in pharmacare. In fact, we've been working very diligently to bring down the costs of pharmaceuticals already, but there's more to do. We want to engage in a dialogue with the provinces on this, and it will be difficult, there's no question about it, but that's the way to get things done. We can wish the world into existence, but we have to work with the provinces to make that happen. The final point, and it's a critical point, is who are you going to trust to do this work? I go from door to door these days, and I have done that in the past 4 years. Cuts, cuts, cuts is all we see from the provincial government. You need a federal government to stand up to Doug Ford. You need a federal Liberal government to make sure that we have pharmacare in this country. We stood up to him. We're going to do it again.
It's provincial. And you know what? I'm going to allow it. Sarah Bahati of the Conservatives rebut.
Thank you very much. Just like a simple question whenever Doug Ford comes up. He's provincial. I have nothing to do with him. But the only answer I will say that Doug Ford is clearing and wiping the mess created by Liberal Kathleen Wayne.
And this is why we stay away from the provincial part of it. We are moving on now to Jennifer Beeman and her question regarding healthcare. And we will start with Sarah Bahati of the Conservative Party for her first answer.
Last year, overdose deaths in London reached an all-time high, many related to the hyperpotent drug fentanyl. They're continuing to be a huge problem in this city. We opened a supervised drug injection site, and there's trying to move on another one, a mobile site. What is the first order of business for your government if it forms government, and how will you work with your provincial partners, including the small C Conservative ones in Alberta and Ontario?
This is a very pressing issue facing not only London North Centre, but entire Canada. I was just listening to a report, and more and more cases of deaths are occurring because of fentanyl and opioid. And I promise that once elected, I will work hard to make urgent developments to take care of this issue. Again, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and she tells me stories in her school. I don't want to take the name of her school right now, but there are drug dealers all around on our streets and everywhere, and we should take a strong stance, no matter which party we belong, to take care of this epidemic of fentanyl and opioid, to save our youth.
Dirk Prout of the MDP.
Hi, thank you. It's a sad situation to see the lives of people being thrown away because of government inaction on this issue. We need more mental health care supports, and we have to deal with poverty that sometimes drives people out into the streets. So our plan is to build 500,000 affordable homes, but we also want to prevent people from slipping into homelessness by giving them a $5,000 a year subsidy if they are renters. And for women, making sure that if they're a victim of gender-based violence, that there's sufficient funding in the system so that they can go into a crisis center. Opioid crisis is a national emergency, and that's how we see it, and that's what the NDP government will do. We will hold pharmaceutical companies to account. We will decriminalize drug possession and deal with the opioid crisis like the mental illness it is. Thank you.
Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
As someone who's personally struggled with addictions, I want to say that this issue is very personal to me. Pharmaceutical companies have just been allowed to do this. They poison our streets with opiates, and they allow people to die in the name of profit. If our government was elected, a communist government, we would put all pharmaceutical companies under public ownership.
Carol Dick of the Green Party.
The Green Party believes that the best way to deal with the opioid crisis is to decriminalize use. We understand that we have a national crisis, and this has to be dealt with across the whole country as a strategy. The way to deal with it, again, as Dirk Prout has said, is as a healthcare issue. We need to get to the root of the problem. We need to deal with the mental illness and trauma that got people there. One of the first ways to deal with this and for people to deal with their trauma is to have a housing-first strategy for people with addictions. When they are off the streets, they are going to be given the opportunities to address their addiction issues. We also want to make sure that there's not only just safe sites for needles and for needle exchange, but to make sure that there is a safe supply of drugs that are in those areas to make sure that we are not having people die from fentanyl poisoning. In a span of just a year and a half, we lost over 10,000 people from fentanyl poisoning. And it is not an overdose, it is a poisoning.
Peter Fragascatos of the Liberals.
Compassion is the first way to deal with this issue. And it's an issue that is facing London. It's an issue that's facing the rest of the country in our cities and indeed in our rural areas. We can't ignore that either. This government very proactively lifted exemptions so that safe consumption sites could be put into place. London has received that support. Doug Ford and Andrew Scheer, quite frankly, would continue with an ideological approach to this problem, which is, I admit also, and I'm glad that some of my colleagues have said so, it is a health care issue. Let's address it with safe consumption sites. Let's make sure that practitioners on the ground are empowered to carry out their work. We have to recognize that they are experts in housing. The comment was just made about housing, and I agree, but the housing approach is already taking place in this community and across the country through the National Housing Strategy, making sure also that those in need have the wraparound support services on site. We're putting that into practice, and we would continue.
And we'll go to Sarah Bahati of the Conservative Party for a 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, I have a question to ask Peter. Peter, you said that Conservative Party hasn't done anything. I'm not even going to Doug Ford. You are here for the past 4 years, incumbent member of the Parliament. And when I'm driving around London North Centre and the neighboring cities, I see homelessness. I see drug addicts. What have you done for them? Thank you.
Ms. Bakari, you might have been driving around for the past few weeks, but I've been here my entire life in this city and in this area. When Andrew Scheer, and I have no personal problem with you, Ms. Bakari. You seem like a nice person, and it's been good to get to know you. The issue is that Andrew Scheer thought he could sneak in a parachute candidate. So here you are asking me about what I've done on these issues. You can talk to the people in this community. You can talk to our health experts on the ground. I've worked to make sure that this issue is addressed.
We'll leave it there. And now to Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
Well, here is a demonstration of passing the buck. There is a problem, there is a crisis, and a responsible government, both in Ottawa and in the provinces, will engage in sitting down and finding solutions instead of passing the buck. That's what we are going to do. A responsible PPC government will be a government that will engage with the provinces, listen to the provinces, they're the closest to the problems in delivering the services, and see what a PPC government can do to help resolve the problem instead of passing the buck.
Okay, we are going to move on to our next section, and that is reconciliation. And this section has 2 questions from our panel. So again, each candidate will answer 2 questions. We will start with Sarah May Chitty's question, and Durka Prout of the NDP will be our first candidate to respond.
So reconciliation is about relationships, and I actually want to ask what you guys have specifically done, here in London. So can you speak to your knowledge of and your relationship with Indigenous communities in the surrounding area, including the urban population? In particular, perhaps could you name them, the treaty this is, any meaningful actions or relationships you've personally or professionally undergone, especially in regards to a decolonizing process?
Okay, that's quite a question, I must say. In terms of what I have done, as a person who is a descendant of stolen Africans who have gone through the colonialization process and slavery myself, I've made it my business to read things like Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King, like 1491. I do watch the news on APTN to familiarize myself with pan-Canadian Indigenous issues. I have spoken to people that I meet or interact with, whether they're personal friends or not, about indigenous issues, and these are indigenous peoples. One initiative I took was last year, because it was the 150th anniversary of Canada. I run a local spelling bee, and what we did is, in answer to one of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to make education a priority, I hosted a special screening of Bee Nation, which features our Saskatchewan fully indigenous chapter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
I've taken a lot of cues and learned a lot from Indigenous people in this community. I have a lot of friends, especially in Oneida of the Thames First Nation, and I was really shocked to hear that they just declared a water boil advisory. And I would really like to see what it is our current government and our Member of Parliament, Peter Fragaskatos, is doing about this.
Yeah, well, Peter, go ahead, have 30 seconds there.
On boil water advisories, we inherited a situation where there were hundreds of boil water advisories on reserves across the country. Because of investments that we have made, because of the work that we have done with Indigenous leadership to improve water services, we are slated to go down to zero by 2021. We need to continue this progress. We need to continue that momentum, and certainly Oneida is not exempt from that. It's in our location. It's in nearby London, and I care about that issue, and I want to continue working on it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Carol Dick of the Greens.
What I have done personally is I accept absolutely every invitation that is given to me to come and partake in events that are held by the First Nations people here. But I'm actually originally from British Columbia, and I did a degree at Oxford 5 years ago, and I focused my entire thesis on First Nations people, on cultural reclamation, on language and biodiversity conservation, and the way that we can build our communities up by respecting traditions, the culture, the literature, and everything that we have, and tie that to biodiversity conservation. And for me, what was really important was reading through all the documents, reading through everything that happened with the residential schools, was that I needed to share this information with my daughters. And so I would say that the biggest thing that I do is educate my children on these issues, share books with them, teach them about the different legends, anything that I can do. And that's covering across Canada from the Inuit to east to west.
Thank you very much. Peter Fragaskatos of the Liberals.
The answer is personal in one part and professional in the other. In my personal life, I've strived, like a good number of Canadians, perhaps most now finally, to learn more about Indigenous history. The result is that that's informed my professional work as the Member of Parliament for the past 4 years. Working with local Indigenous organizations, I mentioned before at LOSA, also the Namarin Friendship Center. It's been very humbling, to be very frank with you. That process where I, as a white man with white privilege, have encountered things that I didn't know. And working with, especially at LOSA, on securing funding for their reconciliation work to promote that. Also, if I'm certainly re-elected, I will absolutely prioritize housing. The director of the organization and I have had some preliminary conversations. We need to see more urban Indigenous housing in London and the area.
Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
Well, the issue of reconciliation between the First Nation or any people is not a theoretical issue. It has to be demonstrated practically. Our Prime Minister has presented himself as the most empathy on feminine issue, appointed the first Indigenous woman as an Attorney General and Justice Minister, and when she defended the rule of law against his atrocious demands, he threw her out of his cabinet and pushed her out of his caucus. That is where we are. This government is very good at virtue signaling. Peter, if he had any demonstration of a practical type instead of virtue signaling and lots of words, would have gone and sat with the former Attorney General outside of the Liberal caucus in the manner in which Justin Trudeau had treated her. So reconciliation began by actually the leadership showing how reconciliation is done.
There, Mr. Mansoor, and we will give Mr. Fragaskatos 30 seconds to rebut.
The question was on reconciliation and what we can do to advance that agenda in this country. Now, in 30 seconds, I can't possibly rebut what Mr. Mansoor has said, except to say that, yes, the issue of SNC was not handled nearly as well as it could have been. But I look at the intent of the Prime Minister on SNC and take his word that jobs were his focus. When we have the potential, no matter how big or small, that jobs will be lost, the Prime Minister has a duty to inquire and ask questions about what we can do to save jobs, and that's what he was doing. I believe him.
Thank you very much. We'll end that there, and we will go to Sarah Bahati of the Conservative Party.
When we talk about reconciliation, I really want to draw parallels between the Indigenous community and the Muslim community of Canada. I am a Muslim and I am brown, and I'm really hurt by what our Prime Minister, who looks like the champion, who presents that he is a champion of human rights, draws his face in a black and brown controversy. He was 29 years old. He was a school teacher. I have faced racism, and all my Muslim community and our other ethnic communities are really, really hurt on what he did. Thank you.
And we will give Mr. Fragaskatos 30 seconds to respond.
Mr.
Because
Trudeau,
it was a direct reference to the Liberal government, and that is in line with the precedent that we've set throughout this evening. That's why.
Mr. Trudeau offered a sincere apology to what was an inexcusable incident. There's no question about that. Now, the real answer to this is what we will all do, the Liberal leader, Justin Trudeau included, to advance an anti-racism strategy in this country. We have put in place one already. We will double the funding and continue to work on diversity issues. The people in this community know where I stand on this because I've fought for them every step of the way. Have you been to the mosque, Ms. Bukhari? Do you know the people in this community? Do you know its neighborhoods, its streets, and its people?
Absolutely. Oxford Mosque has been really, really helpful. Brother Ali Amin, we talk to each other.
Did you just go? How many times have you been in the past 4 years?
We'll let Ms.
Whenever I have
Bahati
time. I'm a Shia Muslim.
I will
I'm a
ask
Shia Muslim, and
for
I go
calm
to
from
the
the
other
audience.
mosque as well. And I'm a devout Muslim. Alhamdulillah. Can I read the Quran?
No.
Well, I'm originally a daughter of East, and Canada is my adopted country. So I have been actually living at various places because of affordability issues.
Thank you very much for your reply. We will now move on to our question from Jennifer Beeman of the London Free Press, and the first to reply to that question will be Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
Just months ago, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls concluded that the violence facing this community was tantamount to an ongoing genocide. But instead, on the election campaign trail, we've had promises of expanded ferry service in BC, camping subsidies for low-income families, and a national energy corridor. Do you agree with this characterization of a genocide? And if you do, shouldn't this be the election issue?
Yes, I absolutely agree with this characterization of genocide, and it should be an election issue. And I don't think we're going to see or get a real response from any of the two parties that have governed Canada in the last 100 years. We need to elect new parties who have new ideas and who are able to adequately deal with this, not more of the same. We need something new.
Carol Dick of the Greens.
Yes, I absolutely agree with the characterization of a genocide. It is a genocide because the language was not allowed to be carried on, because people have suffered violence, because they have not been allowed to celebrate their cultures. That is a genocide and a cultural genocide. And we do need to address that issue immediately and enact all the recommendations, all the calls to action, the calls to justice. Make sure that UNDRIP is put into law in Canada and address this issue immediately. So yes, it should be top on our list in Canada.
Peter Fragaskatos of the Liberals.
I accept and acknowledge that genocide was used in the report. And there's been debate across the country since that report was issued about the word itself. I think that that debate is worth having, but we have to acknowledge that that is what has been felt by Indigenous Canadians. And more than that, let's take it one step further and continue to work together to make sure that a reconciliation agenda is real. We have achieved a great deal in the past 4 years. I mentioned boil water advisories. I mentioned in passing earlier record investments in health services and education services and housing. We need to continue that agenda to repair the relationship. The Conservatives don't want to do that. The other parties are talking about things that are already happening. We want to continue working with these other parties because it's everyone's business. We have to stay focused and we have to stay united on this issue.
Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
Well, in my view, it is long past the time of talking and doing something about it and doing it actually and practically and demonstrating it. And it begins with demonstration of fairness and respect. But here we have a government and a prime minister who has been found in breaking the Conflict of Interest Act twice by the Ethics Commissioner, Marion Down. We have a government that has broken promises too long for me to read it out over here. We have a government that cannot be trusted on any issue. So how do you expect this government and this prime minister in any way bringing about a reconciliation between indigenous people and the rest of us? This has been going on too long. And you know the old adage that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is another definition of fanaticism or madness. So to hear a liberal or a conservative say that they're going to do something is again falling into madness or fanaticism.
Mr. Fragaskatos from the Liberals.
I'll be very short with the rebuttal to respect everyone's time. The agenda that we put forward after 2015, our platform in short, has been achieved 92% of the way. We achieved 92% of the promises that we put forward to Canadians in the previous campaign. It is, either in whole or in part, it's the best record of a government in the past 35 years. Where errors have happened or where there's been issues, we have acknowledged that, as any government ought to. Stephen Harper had 70 ethics issues brought up. The NDP has had their ethics issues brought up in the past.
There.
You know, these things have to be put on the record.
Mr. Fragaskatos will end there, and to Sarah Bahati of the Conservative Party for your answer to
when
the
we
question.
talk about murdered and missing Indigenous women, we are talking about rights of women. We are talking about violence faced by women. 6 out of 10 incidents of violence is against women. And I would really like to bring this up that 2 strong women in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau cabinet were ousted just because they stood for silence. My 14-year-old daughter said, yes, Mom, it's okay. He's the Prime Minister. He can do this. No, Justin Trudeau, it is not fair. You cannot silence 2 strong women in your cabinet. Thank you.
Durga Proud of the NDP.
It is really disturbing. I went to the Take Back the Night ceremony last Thursday, and I found out that although Indigenous women make up only 4% of the population, 50% of them are sex trafficked. This is a form of slavery, and it's ongoing genocide. When women who give birth have their children taken away, Indigenous women, just because they're poor. Or, you know, so I must say that the NDP government views this definitely as, would view it definitely as a genocide. It's ongoing and it has to stop. We have to immediately implement the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's report, calls for justice. We need to, in our plan is a call to implement a comprehensive plan to focus on violence against women, two-spirited peoples, and gender-fluid people who are Indigenous, and give equal rights to women. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move on to our next topic, which is human rights. We have one question in this section as we move through, and it comes from Jennifer Beeman, I believe, from the London Free Press, and Carol Dick with the Greens will begin.
Canada has a long history of caring about human rights, from the Rwandan conflict and the Rohingya, but it seems we have turned a bit of a blind eye to the spotty record of Saudi Arabia. Our business dealings with them, we have a deal to provide them light armored vehicles made here in London North Centre. I want to know how you as a candidate or as a government would reconcile that.
Our platform specifically says that we will no longer import oil from Saudi Arabia or export weapons to Saudi Arabia. So, we do not believe in propping up governments that are committing human rights atrocities, and we believe that Canada needs to take its place again as a peacekeeping nation. We need to look after other nations and increase our development funds to 0.7%, which was always the call by Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson, but we never reached it. It's time to do that. And one of the ways to help with some of the atrocities that are happening is to make sure that we help all governments, not ones that we have business interests in, and not just ones that we have geopolitical interests in. But just to be clear, no weapons to Saudi Arabia, no importing oil.
Peter Fragaskatos of the Liberals.
When you're in government, you have to make tough choices. And so when we inherited this contract that you're mentioning, Jennifer, when we inherited it, we decided to honor it. And we decided to honor it because there's 2,000 jobs, at the very least, on the line here directly in London. Not to mention the total of 15,000 jobs throughout the supply chain in southwestern Ontario and the rest of the country. Those are people's livelihoods we're talking about. When issues around and challenges around Saudi Arabia's human rights record has come up, we have not hesitated to voice our concern. And we have to continue to balance on this issue our economic obligations to local workers and also our human rights obligations. This government has made record investments when it comes to the Global Fund, for example, to make sure that issues around tuberculosis, malaria, and HIV/AIDS are dealt with. We have much more to do. We have a development agenda that is working. I hear earlier today that Mr. Scheer wants to cut that. It's like he wants to cut healthcare, like he wants to cut funding for homelessness and housing and addiction. We won't do that.
Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
As I say, virtue signaling is a virtue of those who don't have any virtue. I just point out, I mean, it is a Canadian, after all, John Humphreys, who authored the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But this government will not respect the human rights of Canadians. They would deny my students to apply for summer jobs who are pro-life, you see? This is the government that discriminates people against people who put the sanctity of life at the apex of everything, you know? So how is it that this government that goes about talking to the rest of the world about human rights, but when it comes to the Canadian citizen, my students in this city, they are denied their rights to represent themselves, to work for their people, on contracts where the government will say you cannot sign and be paid for because you do not respect or you do not support our preferred position, which is, in this case, pro-choice. So
we will end the comment there, please, Mr. Mansoor, and we will give Mr. Fragaskatos an opportunity to respond.
Simply put, I believe in a woman's right to choose, and I believe that all women in this country ought to have access to vital health services that ensure control over their own body. You, Mr. Mansoor, have a different position. Some in the Conservative Party have a different position. We're always going to be there to defend a woman's right to choose.
Sarah Bahati of the Conservative Party.
I will be talking about why Saudi Arabia is considered and is against human rights, because it judges people who is closer to Allah or not. Just like my friend Peter Fragaskatos said, how much a Muslim you are. Do you go to a mosque? Only Allah and God is the judge, that if I am a Muslim or not. That is why we are having blatant human rights violation in Saudi Arabia. And I come from Pakistan, and the reason I came to Canada was equality, was democracy, and was equivalent women rights. And I will stand for women rights. I also have my organization called Strong Moms Empowered Women, which focuses on women who have faced challenges and now are influencers. Thank you.
I don't want this to devolve into too much back and forth on this particular issue, but it was raised, so Mr. Fragaskatos.
To be very clear, Ms. Bakari, when I asked if you had been to the mosque, it was to see how connected you are to the London community. I recognize that you're a devout Muslim and that you have the right to practice your religion as you wish. There is no disrespect in that regard at all. But I was simply making the point that to represent this community, you have to know its institutions, its people, its neighborhoods.
And this final word on this issue will come from Ms. Bahati, and then we will move on.
Alhamdulillah, I'm a practicing Muslim and no one has a right to tell me how good a Muslim I am. Only Allah and God judges going to a mosque or not going to a mosque. So I am a Shia Muslim. I go to Al-Mahdi Center as well as I did a few talks with Dr. Al-Amin at Oxford Mosque, and it has been beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll move on now to Durga Proud of the NDP on Jennifer Beeman's question.
So when I observed this situation, the Saudi Arabians went in after a coup in the southern part of Yemen. The northern part of Yemen was controlled by Al-Qaeda. Instead of helping in a humanitarian way, they decided to launch a full-on attack because their person in the south had been displaced and helped by Iran. We should not be fueling proxy wars. Part of human rights is justice. And these wars are hurting disproportionately women and children. Have you seen the pictures? They're disgusting. You know, people in the UN human rights community have been saying that they've never seen so much hunger and pain. We should be doing peacekeeping, and we should cut that contract and make sure that we preserve the human rights, dignity, and safety of the people of Yemen.
Thank you very much. We will go to Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
There is an ongoing genocide against the Yemeni people by Saudi Arabia. And it's with this, I wonder, why have we not canceled this contract if we truly care about human rights? Furthermore, I find it very troubling that Peter and other members of the Liberal Party march in pride parades, despite the fact Saudi Arabia has a record of executing LGBT people. I don't feel supported when I see that.
Peter Fragascatos, 30 seconds.
I've been very proud to march in pride parades and will continue to do so. I'm unapologetic in that. On the points that have been raised about the contract, let's think about what would happen if an NDP government came into power. And frankly, there's conservative voices that have called for the canceling of the contract. They flip-flopped. The NDP has flip-flopped on this issue. They were for the contract in 2015. Now they want to cancel it. And thousands of lives would be negatively impacted by that decision. I fought for this community in part and in whole, and I'll continue to do that.
Thank you very much. Durga Proud of the NDP to rebut.
Yes, we know that General Dynamics, once upon a time, produced transportation equipment, mainly trains. It can do so again. We can have safe, energy-efficient vehicles instead of war vehicles.
Thank you very much. This concludes this section. We move now to our final topic, topic number 7, electoral reform. This section has one question. Each candidate will answer it. They have 1 minute, 30 seconds to rebut if it comes up. Craig Needles, take it away.
Peter knows what I'm going to say. 4 years ago, Justin Trudeau famously said that the 2015 election would be our last one under first past the post. As I'm sure all of you have noted, this election is under the first past the post system. Do you believe that our first past the post system is in need of change like Justin Trudeau used to?
And it will be Peter's turn to respond first.
I believe that there are flaws with first past the post, no question. But it is first past the post that gave us a government that put in place the Charter of Rights. First past the post that gave us a government that put in place vital social programs like the CPP and national health care. We consulted Canadians after forming government. What we found was a lack of consensus. Canadians told us that half were in favor of the current system, the other half were opposed to the current system. But those that wanted an alternative couldn't agree on which alternative. Yes, many Canadians want proportional representation, but often they can't even agree on the type of PR that they want. Others want the preferential ballot. And I would say to all of those that really look at PR as the panacea for our democracy, keep in mind that the People's Party under a PR system would elect far more members than they would under an FPTP system. And if you've heard what Mr. Mansoor has talked about here tonight, that should scare you. That should scare you. PR tends to empower extreme voices.
Okay, so Mr. Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
Well, Peter, unlike you and your Prime Minister, we don't put our finger up in the air and see which way the momentarily wind is blowing. The People's Party of Canada believes with Winston Churchill that democracy is the least worst form of government. First past the post system is the least worst form of choosing our government. You know, we don't want any changes in the way things are. You know, we're not going to go like your Prime Minister, making up stories and mine in whatever question is asked to basically cater to the moment. No. This system of government has served us well for 150 years, and we do not see any reason to change it. Thank you.
Okay. Sarah Bahati of the Conservatives.
When you change the rules of democracy, everyone should get to have a say. And Greg is right. Justin Trudeau promised electoral reforms, but like so many of his other promises, he broke it because he is not as advertised. The only electoral reform Justin Trudeau wanted was electoral reform that stacked the deck in his own favor. Any change to the way we elect members of the parliament should be done by referendum.
Okay. Durga Prout of the NDP.
The current first-past-the-post system is unhealthy, undemocratic, and unrepresentative. People of Ontario know fully well what it is to have a party in power that got 39% of the vote, but has 100% of the power. When we have electoral reform, we will increase voter turnout and increase democratic engagement. We will have more diversity of women, Indigenous persons, and racialized people. We will improve regional representation. There will be less partisanship and more cooperation between the parties. This is something I'm hearing at the door. People want us to work together, and the NDP government is prepared to bring that to fruition. We get better long-term outcomes when we have electoral reform. We want to go further to engage people. We want to lower the voting age to 16, and we want to do more to stop disinformation and fake news. Thank you.
Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
So in the 2015 federal election, my entire family voted Liberal because they thought, hey, electoral reform, we're actually going to get a say after this. And of course, that turned out to be a lie. Such a lie that I joined the Communist Party thinking, oh, proportional representation, we might get a few seats. And I was lied to. So I'm pretty bummed out about that.
And Carol Dick of the Green Party.
Yeah, so the Green Party obviously is completely for electoral reform, and particularly it would be great to see proportional representation. I cannot even begin to tell you the number of times in 2018 and in this election, I meet people at the door and they say, I wanted to vote for you, but I thought if I did this, I was going to get proportional representation, or there was going to be some form of electoral reform. The problem with our current system is that it just leads to fear-based voting. And when you have fear-based voting, that leads to voter apathy. People feel completely disconnected from their governments. They don't feel that their government represents them or that their vote actually counted. If we have it the way it is right now, we're swinging back and forth between two partisan governments that start taking apart the policies that the other one did just because it is the other party, and we don't get anywhere. We can't create national strategies that are looking 20, 30, 40 years in the future. Instead, we are constantly putting out fires as we're going from one side to the next, and we're seeing this on a provincial level. So we absolutely need electoral reform.
Thank you very much. All right. We made it through all our sections. That means we have reached the final portion of the evening, which are closing statements. We have 30 seconds for each of our candidates to say their piece in their last pitch to you, the audience, and voters at large who view this program later on. We will go in reverse order from how we began this program. So that means that Durga Prout of the NDP will deliver her closing statements. Everyone is speaking from their seat to save on time moving. That means I will stop talking so they can start.
Hey, thank you. The NDP platform isn't about a single issue. It's a complete plan to address inequality and tackle climate change and the housing crisis by building energy-efficient, affordable homes, to meet our emissions targets that are science-based, to fight climate change. We will create good green jobs and offer all Canadians head-to-toe health care. Together, we can have an affordable life in London, with an NDP MP on your side, not for the corporations and the ultra-rich. The planet and the people cannot afford more delays. Please cast your vote for Durga Prout and the NDP.
Thank you very much. Sarah Bahari of the Conservative Party. Do we have 30 seconds? 30 seconds, a whole 30.
Okay. Here I am. So, ladies and gentlemen, it was great to see you all. The only thing I would like to say that if you work hard, you should be able to save for a house, buy a house, save for your children, and take care of your parents. But Justin Trudeau has made life harder. Vote for me, I will fight for you, and I will serve for you. Thank you.
Celine Mansoor of the People's Party of Canada.
As I pointed out, trust is broken in our society. Trust is broken because our people cannot trust those who have been running our lives, running our government out of Ottawa. And we cannot send them back to find a remedy for it. So we have to first get rid of them, unelect them. They do not represent us, and then rebuild the trust in ourselves. And the remedy is to come along with people who speak straightforward and honestly. That is the People's Party of Canada.
Thank you very much. Peter Fragaskatos of the Liberal Party.
We've seen tremendous progress in the past 4 years. 1 million jobs created across this country, most of which are full-time. Wages on average are up. 1 million Canadians lifted out of poverty, including 350,000 kids, and 90,000 children supported by the Canada Child Benefit in this community. I fought for this community because I live here, I was born here, and you know me. You know me as a champion MP that wants to continue to engage this community, believing in the constituency, its organizations. I won't stop fighting for you. That's the question on ballot day on October 21st. Thank you very much.
Carol Dick of the Greens.
A year ago, climate change barely registered as an election issue, and this year it is the topic of the federal election, with each party leader weighing in on it. The Green Party doesn't just say that we're going to reach net zero emissions by 2050. We actually lay out a 20-point plan to get there that is going to build our economy, that is going to build our society, and that is going to make life better for everyone. We know that we need to work together to really tackle issues, and we hope that we're going to see more Greens this year influencing policy. Thank you.
Clara Sorrenti of the Communist Party.
With all that we've talked about tonight, I'd like to appeal to you all. If you liked the policies of the Communist Party, meet me after this debate. Look up on Facebook or Twitter, Communist Party of Canada. We're a small party with big goals, and we want to build a base of support in this community. Thank you.
Okay, so we've heard from our candidates in London North Centre. Thank you so much to all of you for being here this evening and being an engaged and vocal audience. Without you, we would not be here. This is what it's all about. Thank you to the team at Aeolian Hall, Andrew Rosser, our media panel, Sarah Mae Chitty, Craig Needles, and Jennifer Beeman, all of our candidates. It takes a lot of guts to be up here to take questions, so thank you all of you for being here.